Before I begin our discussion and introduce our guest panelists, let me share some introductory remarks concerning our topic. As you know, we are going to talk about kind of a transformation from e-government toward we-government. Looks kind of a progress that government which modernized itself by the means of digital tools now is facing the possibility or opportunity of further modernizing and opening toward us citizens, and we also as citizens, as we are talking about this today, get more power because of these new tools and access to data and huge amounts of data which empower us with information and diminish this informational asymmetry which was a basis for government in the older days. But it would be a little bit simplistic approach to the topic, I think, at least as we look at it from the perspectives of countries like Poland. Because the problem in our country, for example, is that we have no e-government yet. So the further transformation is demands answer for a question, how or why we don't have a government, why it is so difficult to have access to different modern e-services. And the answer is quite simple, because our government is very weak and is not able to deploy technologies to improve quality of public services. But then there is a question why the government is weak. Is it that politicians are idiots and civic society is good but have no voice? Or otherwise, that also civic society is weak and because of that doesn't control the government in an efficient way? We will discuss, because in my opinion it's a crucial question. Is it possible to use all these tools we are talking about this today, open data and ideology of open government, to improve the situation, in the situation when the government and the civic society are both weak? Perhaps it's particular perspective of my country, but we will share experiences from other countries, and now it's time to introduce my guests. So we have Vukosawa Crniański, President of the Center for Research and Accountability from Serbia. Welcome. Then we have Paul Lenz, Head of International Projects, My Society, United Kingdom. And Alek Tarkowski, Director in the Digital Center Project Polska. So perhaps I begin with Poland. So let's continue with Polish example, and if you could, Alek, a little bit further into the topic. Perhaps you don't share my opinion, but the floor is yours, so please.
I do share your general opinion, but I want to elaborate on it, focusing on sort of one model or methodology for introducing this change, which I think is close to heart to many people at this conference, and that's the basic model of making data open and then using open data to build tools that increase engagement. And I think it's one of the stronger sort of methodologies that we have defined to bring into practice this move that we are discussing. I want to mention that I've been involved, for those of you, and maybe explain a bit what's the situation in Poland for those of you who are foreigners. So we have a track record of about 2 or 3 years of a debate which started as a debate around access to information law, which had to be extended to include reuse rights. And this became a debate during which also I think certain mechanisms for consultation mechanisms for including members of civil society in the public debate and in the sort of governance of the administration strengthened, and there was a time when there was quite close, if not cooperation, but there was a process of consultations on these issues, which extended then to reuse. Then ACTA came and made all these issues last year very pertinent. So it was a hot topic, and I think a lot was going on. I was involved in this initially as an expert of the government in a unit called Board of Strategic Advisors, and afterwards on the NGO side. So I think we have experience in Poland with attempting to introduce this model. We, in my organizations, are one of several organizations that try to work with the so-called open government model. And I also feel that we're at the point globally where we've been using certain methodologies like hackathons, app competitions for long enough, and trying certain projects like Fix My Street type projects that Paul, you can talk about, or What Do They Know type projects that you can also talk about, or budget spending projects championed by mainly Open Knowledge Foundation, and which we've been doing in Poland, to also necessitate an evaluation. And my general feeling, which I would like to share in this introductory remark and that we can discuss then, is that well, I don't think we're evaluating these projects enough. We're not sharing enough data how they really work. I think we often stop at the moment where there's a working site and everyone looks at it and gets very excited. Both the more technologically advanced people say, wow, great, we're having technologies involved in civil society. And also the traditional civil society comes and says, I don't really know what's going on here, but there's a web page and this is quite exciting. But I don't think we're measuring very well whether this is really building engagement, and this is for me a key issue. And I think we will come to a point soon where we should ask questions whether these methodologies get people involved enough. And I see in Poland three challenges. One on the side of the administration, but two on our side and on the civic side. So the difficulty on the administration part is making data available. I think it's a very clear outcome of the weakness you mentioned. It's not just weakness of the government and the civil society, but of the relation in between. There's a lack of trust which stops the administration from giving data to the people. So that's the first block. But then the second block we reach is if that data is available, it's very difficult to actually find people, organizations able to wrap this data into usable tools. And that I would call a technical challenge. We lack technical expertise in the civic sector. We don't know how to build ties with what in the morning was rightly described as very high technological potential of our region. But I think it's potential that's very well funneled, for instance, in the startup world, which really is booming in our region. But we don't know how to build ties with the civil society. And then the third part comes that these tools, once they're available, they're actually quite amazing. We do have in Poland a host of very interesting tools, for instance, done by a Państwo Foundation. But then I think if we looked very carefully, these might still not be tools that build engagement. So I would say that it's a valid question to ask whether in a country like Poland, which has demonstrated relatively low levels of civic activity, we know that the digital tools themselves can bring this change. And I was inclined for a long time to believe that that's the case. I'm more and more thinking that it's not that simple.
But do you have any ideas why it is so? So perhaps the lack of competences, because we lack of skills to use this. Perhaps they are anyway too difficult to be used by ordinary citizens. Not only it's lack of will, but also lack of motivation, other issues. So, for example, fix my street. What is it for when, for example, government doesn't react to the information which comes from that? And what is how you think? What is behind this resistance to using these tools?
The fact that the government doesn't respond in those projects where it needs to, I think that's a separate issue. But I would say that it's the same resistance that's a resistance to general politics in Poland, and this probably extends to the region. And I just think that we have to be aware that these tools will work for those people who are already motivated, and for them it will make life easier. So we're talking about those involved in the public debate, those involved in some relations with the government, but that's a relatively small circle. If we want to go beyond them, my one sort of working idea right now is that I think we need to look a lot more from those people's perspective. So not to try to bend them to our idea of a democracy, of a E or we democracy, but rather think in terms of what's useful for them, because that's the easiest way to get people involved. And I think simply even a much better parliamentary service or a much better service to complain apparently is not useful for people.
But
And one thought I have is that the area where I think might be a bit more successful, we're still facing challenges, is the field where we're working more on crowdsourcing ideas and on public consultations. I think that in long term, maybe that's the process, for instance, going on right now in Poland, where actually it'll turn out that that's the change which is happening, that maybe more people will get involved in commenting those issues than on using public data.
okay, so last question for you. Because is it all about politics or generally it's a problem of our activities? I know that you are involved in other, let's say, activities like Creative Commons, so you can also watch what is our, let's say, acceptance of digital tools in free culture, for example, expression. So how active are we there in Poland? And perhaps there is a more general problem that we simply don't use internet as an opportunity to broader our
but I
expression.
think it's a bit of a paradox, because in relative terms we have a very strong Wikipedia.
Couple of hundred editors.
Probably when you count everyone. ACTA showed that we have a very vibrant, let's call it digital civic society compared to the region. Everyone says we were sort of really ahead, though I would mention several other countries without discriminating others. I think there's in general a lot going on, but that's still marginal. So it's a strange situation where on one hand I feel a lot changed, not only in open government issues, but you're right, in copyright issues. In all these debates, there are suddenly people mentioning these issues. This wasn't the case 5 years ago. But on the other hand, it's a very small community. And I don't have a magical solution how to increase it. And I won't say education is the solution, because that's what everyone always says.
Okay, so let's move to another Eastern European country, to Serbia. Vukosava, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Well, Alex said more or less you described the situation as in Serbia, but I would like to just go beyond what you mentioned regarding, for example, government reaction, or you said like don't talk about that. I mean, like when we became popular, or like government reacted on our work when we became popular. We became popular when had a combination of new and traditional media. So, for example, the role of media is very important in this transition from e-government to we-government. So that's one of the points I want to make here, and maybe to talk about that a little bit more later. Whether building technology is enough for engaging people, we have the Center of Research, Transparency and Accountability has 3 projects. One is Truthometer, where we actually evaluate politician statements through 3 categories. One is a truthfulness, the second is a consistency, and the third one is whether politicians fulfill the promises. And the second thing, the second project, we were inspired by My Society, but also we wanted to be on a source of information. And that was the transcripts of parliamentary sessions. Since FOIA, or Freedom of Information Act, function in Serbia very well, we succeeded to gather transcripts since '97. So we have published almost 160,000 speeches of the MPs, which actually was really a big move in regarding like open data in Serbia. And we didn't stop. Since we promote accountability, we thought, okay, we have like evaluation of statements of politicians. We now have transcripts of parliamentary session, from parliamentary session. And the third thing is, of course, budget and what's going on with the budget information. So we developed another application or a tool for monitoring the public spendings. And the biggest frustration for me was that I expected that people will use that more. First colleagues and other organizations that we cooperate with, they said, like, come on, like, what do you expect? How many people should use that? That's a good question. How many people we expect that they will use? And for example, I don't know, we are a country of 8 million people, and we have almost like 3 and something million people using internet very regularly. And we have that like now, I don't know, when you combine all these 3 projects, like per month, 100,000 people follow these things. And I'm not happy, and I'm still frustrated and saying like it's not enough. And what we found out that actually when we go and again combine the traditional way of working with people, you know, with online activism, we found out that people don't know how to use. Like, it's not enough that you just published all transcripts, even though those transcripts are searchable by the name of MPs and with the dates and the topics, so it's very easy. And it's not easy, you know, when you start talking with people, they don't know, like, okay, we have those transcripts, and so what should I do now with that? And it's the same with organizations, like civil society organization. When we say like, okay, but now you can find who is a potential ally for a certain topic, like who advocate in the parliament on some green issues or education or anything. For example, they don't know that, and I thought it's too obvious. So it's not enough to have data. Education is one of the solutions. But what I want to say is that if we want to make the real change, then we need to continuously combine the traditional way of work and building community and this online activism. And regarding the administration, since I had that opportunity to work with administration on the national and the local level, yeah, they're afraid of publishing data because they see a lot of mistakes. They're not sure what actually they have done. Nobody evaluates their work. So that's another thing that we should also work with, because the good strategy in Serbia was cooperation with administration. My next question is how long we should cooperate, and when we will like put the light on them and say like, okay, you do this really wrongly, or you make a lot of mistake, even though you don't know, or you have lack of capacity. So, like, yes, a lot of challenges. I love that we started with this, that it's not everything, you know, like purple. And I hope like that you will also join this discussion in a way that you will share experience in this combination online and traditional activism.
Yes, you mentioned the role of traditional media. Could you elaborate a little bit more on this issue? How have you persuaded them to
Yes,
be interested in your stuff?
Well, I think we had luck because content that we made was really interesting regarding this truthometer findings. And then one of the dailies, actually we invited them, and then we agreed that one of the dailies, 1 day per week, published the most readable news that we actually publish on the website. In Serbia, politicians still look on the traditional media. So the first reaction we got when that Blitz Daily published the news from Truthometer, and the point is that they didn't know, politicians, of course, they didn't know how many people visit our website, but they knew that traditional media, the Blitz News newspaper has like 250,000 circulation. That was quite big number for them. So immediately they started reacting. So that was really good. And when you make some content, this is really, let's say, popular, that people would read, this is the opportunity for being able to influence then the political processes, decision making, and so on.
Okay, thank you, Paul. So let's go to your country.
Okay, thank you. Yes, hopefully, if only. So probably best me saying a little bit about My Society first, for those of you who don't know who we are and what we do. In a nutshell, we build websites that enable people to connect with and improve their society in simple and tangible ways. And we do lots of different websites that do different things, and there's no nice one term to describe it, so I'll just give you some examples. We run Fix My Street, that's been mentioned. It makes it very easy for you to see a pothole in the street, report it without knowing who's responsible for it. The system takes care of that. It reports it. You can then see if it gets fixed, and if it doesn't get fixed, you can make a fuss, and something like 150,000 broken streetlights and potholes have been fixed in the UK by using that system. We have an FOI platform called What Do They Know that's also internationalised as Alavatelli, and in the UK around 130,000, 140,000 FOI requests have been made through there. Again, it's taking a complicated problem, raising an FOI request, and making it very, very simple to a user. So to call on kind of one of the earlier themes that's been raised already today, how do you get people to engage? The very first thing you need to do is make sure that the process of engagement is as simple as possible. It's as transparent, straightforward. They have to put in as little information onto a website to press submit. And then in terms of how do you make them feel it's worthwhile doing, it's by being able to give them something back, be that a fixed pothole, which relies on the government, or a response from a Freedom of Information request. Knowing that their action gives them something back is a really good way of driving engagement. We also do parliamentary monitoring, a site called They Work For You, and also another site called Write to Them, to make it really easy to write to your politician. And just one point about that engagement point, and I think the case made about traditional media is really significant. We track the response rates of the politicians to whom the emails get sent. So every year we build a lot of data, which we from time to time then release into the mainstream media to show how good members of parliament are at responding to the people who voted for them. And obviously that's a great news story. It's really powerful, and more to the point, it makes the politicians stand up and take notice, because this is commenting on their performance and their quality. Increasingly in the last couple of years, we've been expanding, working with partner groups around the world through to thanks to the support of the Imager Network, Open Society Foundation, Indigo Trust, HEVOS, and most recently Google. And we've been working very hard to make the technology that we use easily reusable by other people, and also actually to give direct technical support to other groups to help them do similar kind of things. And it's not a sales pitch because we're giving the stuff away for free. If anyone is interested in the technology that we have and the things that we do, please do come and find me either here or at the bar camp tomorrow, because we're always happy to talk to new potential partners and see if we can help you develop projects. End of sales pitch. So there have been a couple of things mentioned that I'd kind of like to pick up on. The engagement issue is really key. And there's the question of what happens if a government doesn't take notice, doesn't do things. And if you're a citizen, what is going to make you interested and actually even take that first step to look for something? And I think one way of overcoming that challenge is to try and make it as relevant as possible to their daily lives. Politics is confusing even to those of us who understand it and study it. It's not easy to find out information, and to an extent you have to be quite educated to understand the processes. But there are things in your daily life that politics has a huge impact upon, be that the price of cigarettes or the pothole in your street or whether your train is delayed. And I think one of the opportunities to get citizens to engage with government, to be, we government activists, is to try and break the ideas of politics down to things that matter to people. we all live busy lives. None of us have enough time. We'd much rather than, most of us would much rather be doing other things than trying to improve the world, because simply it's hard enough just doing your job and looking after your kids. So I think one opportunity is to try and really find those small tangible things and get someone to take an action, get them to see a response and get a benefit. And then maybe they think, well, wow, government isn't this big, scary, distant thing that I have no control over. I can touch it and I can get it to do stuff. And that's a very easy thing to say, and it's a much harder thing to deliver, but I'm a real advocate of that kind of approach. The second thing I'd like to touch quickly upon before kind of handing back over is the question of open data, because obviously it's a really sexy, exciting topic. We've got the Open Government Partnership, and but there are challenges with it. None of our sites would work without open data. It's not often very exciting open data. It's things like mapping data and boundary data and lists of institutions and email addresses, but it's fundamental. I was at an Open Government Partnership meeting recently where some governments who are investing in open data were complaining. They're saying, we're putting all this data out there, making it available, and no one's doing anything with it. Maybe the whole thing's just a waste of time. And I think we've heard comments earlier about the difficulty of it. One way I like to think of what they're doing is it's as though they're building massive, big, fancy libraries. And they're going, why is no one coming in here and reading the books we've put there? And the answer is because the books are in Latin. And not only are the books in Latin, a lot of them have got missing pages and they're badly printed and they're out of date. And even worse, quite a lot of the books are actually about chicken farming, which no one's interested in apart from a few chicken farmers. And it's like that with open data. There's a lot of data that's put on websites, and some governments seem to think that it's almost a competition to see how many Excel spreadsheets they can put up there. The more they put up, the better they are at open data. But that's about motorway bridge maintenance scheduling, and it's written in technical language that no one can understand. So if we go back to the library analogy, what we need to do is have people go to those books in Latin, find the ones that aren't about chicken farming, find the missing pages, clean up the text, and then translate them into English. Sorry, that was incredibly Anglo-centric of me. Translate them into whatever language is appropriate to their audience. Gosh, I can't believe I made that error. Though, yeah, I'll move swiftly on. And I think one of the issues is we talked about civil society engagement. The problem is doing that translation, finding the missing pages is really hard. It's a lot of work, and you have to have the skills. And often the benefit isn't very obvious. And I have no easy answers to that problem. But I know one project that we're doing at the moment that we're being paid for by the government is looking at rail passenger information. They survey hundreds of thousands of rail passengers. They've got all this data. They've made it available. No one's doing anything with it. We're trying to make it usable, but it's going to take 3 months of development time and analysis to take that data and make it usable. If we weren't being paid to do it, we wouldn't be doing it because it's just too big a problem for us to devote scarce resources to. So that's the end of my pitch about open data.
Okay, so let's go back to Alec. And first question is, what about media? We were talking about its role in Serbia. What about Poland? And then, if you could comment on what you have heard from our predecessors. Okay, it works. No?
We do have technical problems.
But this one should work. Okay, no? Not this one. Okay.
Role of media. I'm not sure I have a lot of smart things to say, but what comes to my mind is that we had an exciting moment a year ago when I would get bored with the amount of digital topics on the first pages of the newspaper, a moment which I thought, wow, I've been waiting for that. And then I got bored, but then I started missing that time again because it stopped, It's like we had a digital spring, and now we have, again, an analog winter. I think media don't find these topics exciting. The only sort of, they have I think certain frames they put subjects into, and the only one they can fit it is actually a sort of bastard version of the topic you described. Oh, the government isn't able to be a e-government or we government or open anything, failure again, right? And I think that that in this sense, media are not being very useful. I don't want to generalize too much. I must mention you're doing a different job, I think, just to be clear. But in general, I think that's the case. So I would say in Poland, in this process, unlike in Serbia, I think from what you described, no one has thrown to the media anything really highly exciting that comes out of these models. We have a very advanced, I don't know, open parliamentary, 2 even sites, but, and you can say maybe they should be packaging it more the way you describe, but they're not being used, so I don't see too much of a role. But one thing I'm thinking about when you talk about this metaphor of the Latin and that its pages are missing and so on, well, we are in a way putting a very high expectations on the general public. And I have a feeling that you know, you cannot expect more from people from their use of digital tools than you'd expect from them in general. And it reminds me an analogy to a completely different world where I'm also involved sort of in cultural change under digital technologies, and at some point we believed everyone will do remixes because we said it's 21st century and kids are digital natives, and now everyone will be mixing up movies because they have in their, you know, Macs legal software and their Windows illegal, or in their Linux is legal, but it's just there and they'll do it. But that's not true because it's still very difficult stuff. So another thought I'm having is maybe we should be content with the fact maybe that 100,000 is a lot. But you know, we don't have really measures. How do you know? You always want to do more. You always want to have this groundbreaking impact that you're hoping for.
Okay, we're talking that it's important to have all these services relevant to daily experience of people. Yes. So
Yes, but
what sell the best in Poland?
But
when
you know,
look
the
at
daily.
what-
Oh, this is very loud.
it's-
I have to show
Take
the
this one.
hand. But the daily experience of a Pole, I don't know how it's in other countries, is not extremely politicized. Or if you wanted to bring it to their experience, you'd need to have data on the Smolensk air crash. Then I think you would have like tens of apps. But there is no data there, or it's hidden in the black boxes, or some people believe it's hidden somewhere. But what I'm saying is, so then, and this is actually an approach we're trying to use a bit, but I don't think we're yet there to show the connection. So for instance, the step we made, we started looking what's stuff that's still open data, but a bit somewhere else and might be interesting for people, and we focused on national heritage. And we're taking the National Monuments Registry and working with it with the same methodology, make it available, get people involved in filling in the gaps. And we're trying to sort of ride on this belief we have that Poles really like history. And I do believe in this in a way. I think it teaches people new methods of engagement. Similarly, like I would like a lot more people to edit Wikipedia. Wikipedians hate that. They really like barriers to entry because they say, you know, a lot of people do it bad. I would like, I don't know, maybe not elementary school, but high schoolers to do it obligatorily, because it teaches them a certain mentality that you can be engaged, that you can change something that's called official in the case of Wikipedia. But you understand what I mean. So in this sense, I think also our project shows people there's something official, and you add to it, and if it all goes well, the official one will be improved. They'll accept your Mr. Smith's or Mr. Kowalski's or whatever the popular surname in your country is. Entry. But at the same time, I cannot really make a valid statement that by working on heritage, people, you know, get involved in really serious issues like, I know, transparency and fighting corruption and so on. Maybe we need time to build a model that.
But perhaps it's wrong attitude. Perhaps we should begin with simpler issues which create interest, and then after that.
But it's like that story we now like to say in Poland. You know, we had this big move after we entered the European Union that Poles started going abroad, and a lot of people had the need to get in cheap contact with each other, and they started using Skype. And this is the story told in Poland. Because of Skype, a lot of people start using internet, but now we don't know whether now they're also, you know, doing their banking and taking part in consultations and using government e-platforms, or they just stop with Skype because that's what they need. And that's sort of the similar issues. I'm not sure people will jump so easily to next levels.
Okay, last question in this round.
A very practical thing, that it's sometimes a good thing about practical things, would be to have like an ad network between those sites. Saying things like, okay, you've already seen my monument site, this other NGO is doing a parliamentary site, go have a look. We're not really, you know, we're not really connecting all those different sites together.
Okay, last question in this round, the issue of money. Is there money for this kind of initiatives in Poland? So you are trying to raise them for your activity. So is it
I think
available?
currently all these activities are mainly funded by private private funds, either of Polish charitable foundations like Stefan Batory, the Polish branch of Open Society Foundations, or by international ones like Omidyar, who's funding work in Poland. But I don't think that's sufficient. And I would say that it would be very good if the government believed that in its thinking about modernization of the country, of the society, of itself, I don't know, for instance, planning European fund spending or even its own fund, it should invest in this. But this, an obvious issue that they feel uncomfortable probably in investing money. If they don't fully believe in this model, they won't spend money on it. So it's a bit of a catch-22 situation, I think.
Okay, thanks. So, Kusaba?
Doesn't work. Work. Good.
It works, yeah.
Just like 2 comments. First, there is no quick change. You said like you needed 3 months to develop the solution for something. When we asked for this data, like transcripts and voting records from our parliament for, I don't know, like 6 months period, they called us and said like, okay, are you going to come with a track? And we said like, why? Like, well, we have those papers to give you, so like, can you give us on CD? So that was like the first response from the parliament. Then we realized that documents we received from them are like complete mess. So there was so different models, like from voting records. If you get the voting records, you would receive like 4 or 5 different ways how they would give you like those voting records. So we had, it was 2 years. We needed 2 years to solve those problems. And after we solved the problems, Parliament, and published all these things, Parliament started publishing as well, the same thing. Unfortunately, theirs is not searchable and readable. It's in PDF, but it's still something. And regarding, so my point is like no quick change. Patience is something we need. The second thing is about like this hidden data. Like we thought to organize, for example, regarding the budgets. When we ask through Freedom of Information Act, like for certain data, they would say like, usually they would respond, oh, well, you have that on our website. Where on the website? So it's not possible to find. So we thought to organize some like games, online games, like find budget on the website of some municipality. Because, for example, on the Parliament website and those transcripts I just mentioned that they started publishing, we have 2 letters, 2 types of letters, Cyrillic and Latin. So if you enter website of the Parliament in Cyrillic, you will find the transcripts. If you open in Latin, you can't find because there is no. So like that's also the way how they think that they solve the problem, but still it's something which we need to solve together with citizens and later with the administration. So it's not enough that they publish data. We need to push that the data need to be searchable, that people understand or at least can find. And regarding the third point regarding networking, I think that's really important, really important. As you said, like we were very inspired with My Society work, but there is now ongoing this parliamentary monitoring organization network that was started by NDI and Sunlight Foundation, and now we gathered, I don't know, 100 organizations that exchange their experience in parliamentary monitoring, and it's really valuable. That networking is crucial because you see that you are not alone, that there are solutions, that there are so many people can help you. So yes, networking is really important. At least, you know, like starting with your own country, you know, on open data. You have organization that deals with the budget data, with parliament data, with I don't know which data, but I think all these organizations has something which can be, you know, like shared. So networking really helps, and then you are stronger, you know. And I think credibility in front of the citizens is higher when you have, you know, a lot of organization talking about certain issue. Yeah.
Okay, Paul.
Cool. Oh, it's working. Fantastic. Well, first off, I want to say that I think 100,000 a month is really good. And in fact, it's better than us in that we get 700,000 a month, but we've probably got 10 times the internet population. So, hey, you're beating us. Well done. There's a bigger question, though, I think, which we've kind of touched upon, which is the question of impact. And so if you create something where people can find out more about national monuments, that can be great in that they learn something, that's good, but actually, do they do anything differently? Do they take an action? Does their behavior change as a result? And I think the biggest question for certainly all of the areas that we work in is beyond where you can see a pothole getting fixed or a street light getting mended. What is the impact of the work that we do? What do those hundreds of thousands of people a month going to our parliamentary monitoring site do? Does it actually make a difference at all? And it's a really difficult and uncomfortable question. It's difficult because finding the answer to it is really hard. And it's uncomfortable because the answer to the question might be they don't do anything different. And all this sweat and time and toil and passion and energy doesn't change anything at all. Now, I should say, I don't think that latter circumstance is true. I'm certain that impacts are made as a result of the work that we do. It's just understanding how we assess them. And it might well be that many of the impacts, something that Andrew and I were talking about last night, are not made by the majority of the users. It can be a few journalists who discover something, who can then escalate it, and this is where that link into traditional media can be so important, that they can get a policy change, they can make the difference as to whether somebody gets re-elected or not. And also I think there's a more general point, which is that when people know that the data about what they do in government is being released, and that people can access it, or that what they say in Parliament and how they vote can easily be seen by the electorate, even if not many people look at it, and even if not many people take an action as a result of looking at it, that knowledge of being under scrutiny, I think, can be so powerful in changing behaviours. One small example that recently happened with us is we run the site mzalendo.com in Kenya with the Mzalendo organisation based in Nairobi, and one of the presidential candidates contacted us via Twitter to complain about how we'd rated them on our site. Now, I know how many people looked at that page, and the number of people who looked at that page was not, unfortunately, going to change the outcome of the election. But the fact that they cared enough that they were being observed, that we were making an assessment, that they felt the need to actually contact us and try and change it, I think is hugely significant. Now that's one small isolated example of a tiny piece of impact, but I think when we think about the work that all of the groups who are here over these couple of days do, that we shouldn't step away from the fact that simply knowing that the politicians know that they are under scrutiny can make a huge difference.
Okay, Alec, you wanted to add something, and then we open the floor for your comments and questions.
I think you raised two interesting points. The one about the politicians changing under the influence. It is possible. Then you're right. You don't even need an audience, and maybe that's the most effective way these sites can work. But I think the challenge is that the change might be in the wrong direction. So, for instance, in Poland, when we talk about the fix my type street type sites, we have a fear that in the Polish sort of political climate and levels of engagement and the relation between government and people, it works the other way around. They don't open up and under scrutiny, but they just close down because those pesky citizens complaining. And the other interesting thing, this is just a side note, the thing you said about journalists, that's quite interesting. I have a feeling this is coming to Poland, and I see it, for instance, at Open Knowledge Foundation events worldwide. We suddenly put a lot of sort of faith that the journalists are the next big thing. Okay, so general use of open data not really working. Let's get data journalists going on our site. And this is kind of interesting in the general talk, how, you know, professional journalism is having its problems, it's not getting funding. So I think altogether, it's just a side thought. It's an interesting mix that we're suddenly putting faith again in traditional media, so we better take good care of them.
Okay, thanks. It's time to open the floor for your questions. Okay. First, is there anybody? Okay.
Well, I have a question about My Society and their projects. And I'm very curious, what usually comes first? The idea, okay, let's build a project or something, a grant or something to build the project first, and then comes the government engagement. Because I know, for example, for the What Do They Know website, for the Alaveteli platform, they usually, the politicians a lot of times are very happy that they don't get a lot of requests. They just get one request with a lot of people behind it. And I'm very curious, which is the one that comes first? Does the project come first or the government initiative?
It's not normally the government initiative, unfortunately. What normally happens is that we identify a need, and that's actually quite a long process. We've only done one wholly new project in the last 2 years, and that was a project called Fix My Transport, which is trying to take the Fix My Street idea and deal with a much more complicated thing, which is public transport that's run by private operators. And the way we actually chose that as something that was good and possible to do was that we held like an open call for ideas from all of our volunteer community, everyone who works for us. We then looked at all of those ideas, saw what would be possible, and as a group decided what we should be focusing on. So that was very much driven by an identified need in our stakeholder community. In terms of then government engagement, invariably we start doing stuff and don't ask for permission, because if we ask for permission for things like Fix My Street to send them emails with problems on, then they would just simply say no and the project would never start. And we could try and sell them on the benefits before the project happens, but the reality is they're not going to be convinced by it. However, as time goes on, as you rightly say with Alaveteli, under the guise of What Do They Know in the UK, that for every freedom of information request that gets raised, it gets viewed by 20 people. So actually there's potentially a big efficiency saving for government. Rather than 20 people each raising a request, one person raises a request, 20 people look at it. But it does take time for that government engagement to come about and for them to realise their benefits for it. Having said that, there's some local authorities who do see the benefits, and we're doing a version of Alaveteli for a local authority to manage all of their freedom of information requests. They want to publish everything online, be it coming via email, via hard copy letter, because they see the value of doing it. And that's wonderful, but it takes quite a long time to get that cultural shift to get there.
Okay, thank you. Gentleman here. Okay.
Hi, Igor Ostrowski. I'm actually a co-founder with Alek of Centrum Cyfrowe. And I have a question to Paul, because I really like what you said about making people realize that they can actually touch the government and make a change. And I think that's the real difference between e-government and we government. And because it's a change in the shift of perspective, but it's also a change in agenda setting. Yeah. You allow people to look at and actually influence the agenda. We've had that in Poland several times. ACTA was just one of the occasions, but we had several things, several events like that previously. But, and I understand that data is absolutely prerequisite, it's important, we have to get it out, but is it really everything? And I wonder whether we should take more action, and I wonder what My Society is doing to educate the government to be more, I wouldn't say responsive, but at least ready for what's coming. Because I'm quite sure that in Poland we're going to get another ACTA and another one, and probably something happening every year. The problem is that unless it really gets heated up to a totally out of control situation, it doesn't get responded by. And so I'm afraid that unless we start, let's say, entertaining the idea of we government to government, it'll never happen. And so I was wondering what you can do, and are there any actions other than just saying, hey, it's cheaper, hey, it's effective, are there any other ways of trying to enter that dialogue with the traditional, let's say, analog government?
I think there are probably two separate points there. The first one that you make about data and it being critical and yet can be really hard to get hold of and take a long time and therefore can be a barrier is very true. And I should probably have caveated what I said before by saying that you can set up an FOI site where you've only got hold of one email address of one department. And you start off by having that FOI site saying, okay, this only means that you can raise FOI requests to this department, because that's the only piece of data that we can get. But even that is better than nothing if you can establish it. And I think I should have, again, made clear that you're never going to get perfect data. And that if you wait on that for your project to start, then, frankly, you're going to wait forever. So I think it is important to identify those things where if you can just grab a small piece of information to get something started, then start small with something that works and then expand from there. The bigger question you raise, though, is about engagement, and it's a much government engagement and dialogue, and it's a much harder one to resolve. We're very fortunate in that because we've been around for so long that Tom, our founder, has actually advised the current government on openness, transparency and access to data, and has, I think, made a seismic change in how they approach engagement. It's by no means perfect yet, but it's certainly heading in the right direction, and it's hugely encouraging. I would say that in a situation such as yours, it's trying to find one person who has some power, be they one elected politician, one person in a department who is possibly of a newer generation who understands the opportunity and understands the value, to try and identify those people, to try and forge relationships with them and try and go through the process of really reaching out to them, engaging with them and persuading them of the value. And that then, on a similar way to if you can get one email address, you can start something going. If you can find one politician who can be an advocate or one person who works in one department who says, actually, we're prepared to try this, then they can be, hopefully they can become an evangelist and they can spread the message of value to their peer group. I know that's a really easy thing to say and it's really hard to find these people, but we're increasingly seeing it in local authorities in the UK that tend to be very traditional and very, putting up lots of barriers to engagement, even if central government's getting better. But you do, from time to time, by just looking at who follows us on Twitter, who is an elected councillor, because suddenly these people are people we should be reaching out to and talking to try and make things better. And I don't know if that's at all useful or if that would be appropriate in your case, but I think it's finding that one person and trying to make that connection. And it could take months or even years, unfortunately, to get them to the point where they're prepared to properly engage. But if you can do that, I think that's one way that success can be achieved.
Okay, thank you. The floor is open, so please join discussion. Who's next? Okay.
Thank you. Hi, I'm from Association 61. I have a question about Serbian project. It's like you told a lot about education and that there is a necessity to learn to teach people how to use all this data. And I would like to ask if you have any concrete ideas or any experience with this education. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
We are in the process of learning, like engaging people and how we will. Like for what we have done for Open Parliament project is that we made like presentations in 20 cities. We organized like this accountability bus and then invited all local NGOs and local media, and of course we tried to of course publish that we are coming on Facebook, Twitter, but also on the local media. So we organized these workshops in those 20 cities where we presented what Open Parliament website actually can offer civil society organizations, also media. Then we invited them to discuss, then we asked them what they think, and that was like kind of a this learning process. And we got the good response. Like local media coverage was really great. On the other hand, like we still wait for some civil society organization initiatives toward Parliament. And we will see, like now, our parliament is now in the process of organizing public hearings, since that's really rare in Serbia. I know, for example, public hearings in Britain is something which is, of course, normal. You have, I don't know, 30, 40 public hearings per week. We had last year 16, I think, for 1 year, and you have 30, 40 per week. So both administration, parliament, we as someone who is doing parliamentary monitoring are in the process of learning. So because of that, when we did this study visit, it's also some of a good way to learn. For example, we found out in the United States that all these similar websites has like tutorials or manuals how to use those websites, which is quite interesting. But the study visit to UK helped us a lot to understand how the things are functioning. But the thing I wanted to say, like when we introduced Serbia's context and said like, okay, we think that we are in kind of a pre-democratic period, then a lot of NGOs representatives said like, we are in the post-democratic period. So that's maybe the one of the differences we have. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. Who else? The last chance to comment or share experiences or ask question. So if not, let's come back to our panelists and the issue you raised in your sentence, this post-democratic aspect. Isn't it that everybody, every country we have experiences here is in this phase, because we are talking about improving on the one hand government, on the other hand civic engagement. Isn't it that the crisis we are still in, isn't it showing that we have a crisis of legitimacy and generally the problem of democracy or representative democracy as a system of shaping political will and finding solutions for issues important for society is in crisis. So if we look at this way, aren't we utopian thinking that just technology can solve these issues? Perhaps we should look for solutions elsewhere, but I don't know where. So what's your opinion? Is it that we are coming into post-democracy and we are building something completely different kind of society?
I think it is difficult because if you look upon the differences from 150 years ago and the battles that have been won, which isn't to belittle the battles that are still to be won, but to have moved from very little representation to universal suffrage to labour rights. It's if you look at the battles, even my parents' generation, they were things that motivated and moved people because they were affecting them so radically. And in the UK, I think the concept of being post-democratic is certainly true to an extent, because not only are people relatively okay, there's also relatively little differentiation between the political parties, and increasingly so. A broad centrist move, some extremes on either side, but broadly very little difference. And then it does tie into that question, which is, well, how do you drive engagement? How do you get people to care? How do you get people to vote? Voting percentages are going down all the time, particularly in local elections. And I think, as I said before, but it's really hard to do, is trying to find a way of making it relevant to them. And I think that is a combination of education and advocacy, because politics, every single moment of your day, it's being influenced by political decisions. It's just you're not aware of that. It's from the price that you're paying for your litre of beer in the bar, to the time that your buses are running, to what age you have to retire at, to whether you get social security. All of these things are hugely political. But I think people, because they don't have that same concept of the big battle still to be fought, certainly in the UK, that they just don't realise that, and they don't think, again, to my earlier point, that they could even influence them if they were aware of it. So I don't have any easy answers at all, unfortunately. But I think it is the notion that we kind of move into this slightly grey attitude of not feeling engaged, not feeling passionate and committed is hugely depressing.
Thank you. Kasaba?
My final remark, or the closing remark, would be like that yeah, it's not enough just having data, like open and all these things, but like, I think that we as civil society organization and NGOs, like, we cannot forget why we do this, that all this is because of citizens, and that citizen engagement is the crucial one, and that we have to, you said, like, make those data easy, accessible, simple to be used and so on, but not forget citizens, like when we speak, when we involve them, like why we do that is something which we need to have in mind all the time, and that the real change will come when we have like this, the question is like, again, I think in these big numbers, that the real change will have when people understand. So that's what we need to.
Yes, but what can trigger these emotions and this will to act together to change the situation? Nationalism or labor laws or issues, or what now is this hot topic which could spark kind of revolution, let's say?
I think those simple things, like tangible things, everyday things, we should, as like bridge between, I don't know, citizens and politicians, make it understandable for ordinary citizens. I think that, like if we succeed, like that people understand that those things that are happening every day, that are so normal, that we get them for, like, how you say, get them for free, is it? That it's actually politics, then I think that's a good track.
Okay, Alec?
I have one final comment, but first one more thought on the
Okay,
post-democracy. It fits a bit in the subject, but I just realized, also in the last years, I think we, observing this process where NGOs and civil experts are quite strongly involved, although not always happy how. In the process of governance, I think we learned one very interesting thing, that often if we believe, and I think this is something we didn't discuss, but it's very important, one thing that we're working with is the capacity of governments to deal with really difficult, complex problems. Opening up data or content is part of the solution, helps a bit. Like with ACT, a lot of the complaint was just let us see what's there, right? But it's just only part. But what's happening in Poland is that we get situations where it turns out the know-how and the ability to provide solutions is not in the government. My favorite case is there's a Polish project called INDECT. It's an EU-funded, very controversial project done by a consortium of universities run by the Polish Jagiellonian University to create software that creates smart surveillance, like face tracking or behavior recognition. Like if someone kneels down with a bag, there's a 90% chance he's a terrorist in a subway station or something like that. Very controversial, very little thought put by the project itself into, sort of social background, theory behind it, controversies, risks. So the researchers are not doing it. The oversight, the commission doesn't seem to be doing it. The Ministry of Internal Affairs, responsible for it, not doing it. There's a consultation meeting of all the sides, and everyone starts looking at a small group of NGOs run by the Panopticon Foundation, around 5 persons, and because they turn out to have some idea, for instance, what are the risks. And everyone starts thinking, dear madams, there are a lot of ladies there, if you would be so kind to provide us with insight on what are the risks of this kind of projects. This like crucial risk assessment in complex situations is a crucial task. And if we're outsourcing it to a very small community, I'm on one hand happy we have that Panopticon Foundation, but on the other, something wrong, and that's for in post-democracy. This cannot be solved by simply open data, but this is a challenge we government could solve, but that's a lot more difficult to really get to. But my final remark is that we can also think of we government without falling into communism as government beyond the government, right? The same methodologies can be applied away from the government. Say Wikipedia, right? There's no public involvement in it. It's just people organizing themselves with same models of making things open, filling in the gaps, translating Latin into their language. And I think this is a very promising field. In simple terms, we do a project called Open NGO where we believe NGOs should be just as open as the government. They don't have such an obligation, but there's a very good reason for them to do that. That's the simple step. The sort of visionary step is that we really should put these methods on ourselves as citizens and look for new ways of sort of, self-organizing, I guess.
Okay, so thanks a lot. So now we can see that the road from e-government to we-government is a needed one, but not very easy one and very demanding. So we are closing this part of our discussion, but we can continue it outside this room. So, but thank you for now, and thank you to my panelists, and okay, thanks.